So good morning and a very warm welcome to today's Google Ads Masterclass. Next slide, please, Justin.
There you are, Simon, we can see you.
Perfect. So in our session today, we'll be taking a look at some of the insights from our upcoming ebook, the Sports Betting Consumer Survey. We've got the next slide, please, Justin.
It's on its way.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So in the in this session we'll be looking at some of the insights from the Sports Betting Consumer Survey, where we recognise that sportsbook and casino games are some of the most fiercely competitive search markets. This is why it's important that we understand our customers and why Receptional has conducted the research into the buying habits of your potential customers. Thank you. And on the next slide, we wanted to understand how the punter chooses their operator and how many operators they use, how they conduct their research, and what types of content that they most enjoy. We also wanted to understand what influences their decision to bet and what new products they'd like to try. So just before we get into the detail, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to today's speaker, where we'll be hearing from Justin DeVille, who is the Managing Director at Receptional. Justin has over 25 years of marketing experience and has worked with a number of the UK's leading brands. And finally, I'm Simon Lachlan, Business Development Manager at Receptional, and I'll be your host for today. And also, we would like to hear from you as well. So if you do have any questions throughout the course of the session, then please use the panel on the right-hand side of your screen to pop the question in the box there, and then we'll run a Q&A session at the end. With that being said, I'll hand over to Justin.
Cheers, Simon. Thank you very much. I think it took a little bit too much pleasure there in reminding people that I've been working for 25 years in this industry. Seems like a very long while. But welcome everyone to today's webinar. It's fantastic to have so many of you joining us today. As Simon said, we recognise that sports and gaming is one of the most competitive markets in online advertising. It's expensive. There's lots of players spending lots of money, and so we wanted to investigate the market and do so from a point of view of understanding the data. So I think it's worth looking a little bit about context before we look into the findings and Receptional's approach to online advertising, where we're coming from. And I think as marketers, as all marketers, we feel that we should have the humility to acknowledge that we're not the target audience for most of the campaigns that we run, and that we always therefore want to improve our audience understanding, which is why we took the approach that we did with surveying this panel of people who play kind of online games and gamble on a regular basis. The panel itself consisted of 400 people, and we vetted the panel to make sure that they had at least one gaming account already and that they placed a bet within the last few months. So it's an informed audience that we're talking to. And at Receptional, while we have a fantastic team of creatives, we always want to be guided by consumer data. The data should inform our strategy, it should inform our audience targeting, and of course it should inform our creative and our messaging. So as Simon said, we're going to publish an ebook within the next few weeks, but for what we're going to do today is allow you a sneak preview into some of the findings. So let's dive in. Let's get started. So if we talk first of all about the opportunity, we asked our panel how many online accounts they had, and we learned that most of the panel relied upon multiple operators. This probably isn't hugely surprising, but the fact is that less than 1/3 of respondents had just one gaming account. Some 70% of our panel had more than one account. And I don't think that's a question of loyalty. It's not that people are fickle. It's just that once they find an operator they like, they tend to stick with them. But I think the key thing is time and I was going to say efficiency, but efficiency is not quite the right word, is it? It's about ease. I think ease is the word. People want an easy life, and if they find an app that works for them in a particular market, then they will bet with an app in that market and use different apps for different markets or different propositions. So I think it's common for people to be using multiple apps, and that should affect our thinking. So just moving on a slide. We also then wanted to understand how punters split their spend between those multiple accounts. So we asked our panel how much they budgeted for their online sports betting each month. And perhaps it wasn't too surprising to learn that those with more accounts deposited more money. And what that means for us, again, as advertisers, is that if you're poaching your competitors' customers, your competitors' account holders, you should, on average, be attracting larger and more frequent spenders. So as part of our survey, we also asked some factors around age, gender, the usual demographics, and we'll come on to those later. So I think this means that there's an opportunity perhaps in a couple of areas. First of all, if we think about how this research affects our advertising campaigns, well, half of respondents, so just about 50%, said that they remembered seeing a brand ad from a gaming company within the past 24 hours, which tells us that despite the impending Gambling Act review, there is still intense competition in this market. So this means you're going to need to fight both hard and smart if you want your brand to be remembered. And you'll want to make sure that your brand is in the consideration set when a prospect is considering placing a bet. And clearly, if punters are using more than one app, there's a need to differentiate, to present our unique selling points, our USPs, so that we differentiate our brand from the competition. So we want to give our audience clear and distinct reasons why we're better than the competition. And so what's the best approach for brand awareness campaigns? Well, we're always keen to remind the people that we work with that only 4% of time online is spent searching. And the rest of the time we spend online is browsing other websites, being on social media, all the other things that we can do. And in that case, display ads offer an opportunity to get in front of our audience for all the rest of the time when they're not searching. But we know, we hope at least, that they're actively interested in our brand. And so despite the fact that only 4% of our time online is spent searching, about 90% of our ad budget often goes into search advertising. And that's why cost per click in this sector is among the highest of any sectors that I've worked in. And so we know too that display and video campaigns, and I'll use those terms probably interchangeably throughout, display and video are best often used for considered purchases when someone's taking a longer time to go through the buying cycle. And so I thought it was worth, as that applies to us, looking at some display tactics. So one of the approaches that we can take to display is using custom audiences. And what do we mean by custom audiences? Well, if we want to acquire first-time depositors, FTDs, then this is simply a way of targeting those users who've already searched on Google. And what this simply means is that we're aligning the audiences for search, display, and video. So it's the same audience for all three things. And it also means that we're going out with consistent messaging to those audiences as well. And the second tactic that we probably want to look at is targeting competitors' customers, because we said there was an opportunity there to get higher value customers by targeting our competitors' clients. So let's look at each of those tactics in turn. First, we said we wanted complementary search, display, and video campaigns. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, rather than having your search and display activity operating slightly independently of one another, often there's a crossover, but they're not completely aligned. What we want to be able to do is to join the dots using our custom audiences between Google search and display and YouTube video advertising. And by following this approach, what it means is that all of your campaigns tap into search behavior. So someone in this example has searched for horse racing betting. Well, we can target that person on YouTube with a video ad as part of our prospecting. If they visit our site, we might then target them with display ads as part of a remarketing strategy. That would be a common thing to do, but in this market we might use display for prospecting more commonly. And then the third thing is that we can target that person on Google search ads as well. So the audiences and hopefully our messaging too is all completely aligned. And by following this approach, we have this powerful mechanism of combining the commercial intent that you see in search with the emotional storytelling power of video and display. And that can be powerful stuff. Let's look at the second tactic that I'd mentioned, which is about stealing your competitors' traffic. And the fact is that we know that the biggest brands in this market have invested millions in their brand campaigns. And so this tactic is really about piggybacking on that investment. And we see in this chart here that there is enormous potential for targeting competitors' brand searches with display and video ads. And here you can see the millions of searches for the UK's top 5 gaming brands. I mean, it's obvious that Bet365 takes the lion's share of those brand searches. And what we're talking about here, just so we're clear, is people who search for Bet365, but also Bet365 login, Bet365 offers, Bet365 sign up. So any of those brand related terms that we would see that all relate to Bet365. It's enormous potential. And what we know is that competitor search campaigns targeting competitors' brands in your search activity is pretty common. We see that in most industries. And yet there's a challenge with it, because the chances are, if you're targeting Bet365 as part of your activity, that you don't have much relevant content on your own website, which means that your quality scores are going to be very low, which means that your cost per click are going to be relatively high. And so those competitor search campaigns are always very expensive, even when you can get them converting. And yet, display campaigns that target competitor searches are relatively rare. And yet they can be an incredibly cost-effective way of getting your brand in front of a highly relevant audience that we know in this market in particular, is an important audience for us. And better still, you don't just have to rely upon the way that people search for these competitor campaigns. You can create audiences that are based upon site interactions. So we might target people who'd been to the Bet365 login page because they're almost certainly customers of Bet365. But we might also run different campaigns based upon the pages of the website that people have visited. So you could have a football betting campaign that targets a number of different competitors. You could have a greyhound campaign. You could have a bingo campaign. There are numerous possibilities. But I think before we consider how we segment our audience and how we then apply appropriate messaging to the segmentation, I think it's worth asking ourselves, what does our audience want? And at this point, I'm going to hand back to Simon, who's going to ask you what you think gaming audiences are really interested in. Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Justin. Yeah, as Justin mentioned, now we're just going to run a quick poll which you can all feedback on. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Justin.
Nice way, Simon. It's a bit of a lag.
There is. Thank you very much. Yeah, so like I said, we're going to run a poll now. And the question is, what do you think is the main factor that influences your audience to make a deposit with an operator? So you can see the options there in front of you. Perhaps it's brand reputation. Maybe it's regular promotions, memorable adverts. Could be welcome offers. And finally, betting options. So which of these do you think is the main factor that influences your audience to make a deposit?
And so, Simon, we have got a team of marketing experts who work in this sector on a regular basis, here today. I think this is well, it's certainly the busiest webinar of the year so far, but that would be not a great call. But certainly, you know, there's more people attending today than we saw at a number of our masterclasses last year as well. So it's a pretty busy webinar, and we've got a whole load of experts in the room. So I'm going to be really interested to see how our poll results compare with what our audience thinks. So if we could just give a couple more seconds for people to fill that out, if we can do, and then I will close the poll and share the results. And I think we're going to be interested by the findings. And hopefully I can share those results now. And the system tells me that you're viewing the results as an audience. And as we can see, Simon, it's going to be interesting to compare with what our panel said.
Absolutely. You can see that brand reputation and regular promotions appears to be sort of top of the list there.
And indeed, welcome offers, I think, on 31%. And that's no great surprise, is it? We talk about welcome offers the whole time. And bottom of the table is memorable adverts. So if we try and remember that order, because I think it's interesting to compare with what our audience said. Cool. So I will hide that poll and then we can move on. So thank you, Simon. Cool. So just as a comparison, here's what our panel said was important when they were choosing an operator. Our panelists actually said that having a memorable advert was the most important factor that determined whether they opened an account. The absolute reverse of the poll that we've just run. So all of you as an audience said that was the least important factor. The factor that you said was most important was welcome offers, and with some wonderful symmetry that I couldn't have predicted, welcome offers is the least interesting option for our panel. Now, you may say that our audience are being subjective there. There's lots of reasons why we might question the panel's findings, but there was 400 people who are regularly betting, and these are their thoughts. And in fact, you know, I think these results are surprising enough that I would love to hear your thinking on that when we get to the end. So when we have our question and answer session, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and you can put those either in the chat or in the question boxes beneath us, because I think the results are so starkly different to what our audience here today was suggesting that there is some discussion to be had as to why we think we've come to such directly opposite conclusions. But however we think about those results, our survey is certainly suggesting that too often we focus upon the value of the opening offer at the expense of other unique selling points, when I think the reality is that clearly our panel's views are more nuanced. And I would say that it's certainly worth testing some of those other factors in our ad campaigns just to see how our audience responds. And so here's our top 5. Here's the top 5 influencing factors that our panel talked about. And so let's consider, first of all, memorability. Our audience said that memorable adverts, and remember, half of them remembered seeing an ad within the last 24 hours, are the key to making them sign up. And if we want to create memorable adverts, then creative is clearly crucial. I'm not going to spend huge amounts of time today talking about creative. But the fact is, there are some basics that you can make sure are in place that are more likely, it means it's more likely that your adverts will be remembered, even if you can't afford Ray Winston to front up your campaigns. Let's check the basics. So 3 things. Make sure that your ad works well across different screen sizes. If your ad can't be seen, it ain't going to be memorable. If you're not already testing responsive display ads, then we get some really nice results with those. So make sure you're doing that. And then thirdly, when it comes to video, again, make sure that the video works both upon desktop, but also upon a small mobile screen. Make sure that those ads perform equally well in both environments. That's perfectly possible to do. And then going down the list, I think if you've got great online customer service or particularly favorable online reviews, it's worth seeing if you can reference those in your ads and seeing how you can test messaging there. Make sure that you're emphasizing those USPs that differentiate you from the competition, and it's not just all about that opening offer, which can be very samey. Cool. So moving on through the data, we said we were going to talk about some of the demographic information that we discovered. And so there's an interesting point here that ties in with what we were talking about just. So preferences by age. In fact, younger prospects said that they were interested in welcome offers much more frequently than those people who are older, who perhaps have been betting for longer and therefore were less interested in those enticing offers. And in fact, the older prospects were particularly interested in brand reputation, in customer service, in online reviews. The quality of the experience is much more important to that older audience. And I speak as someone in that audience, that chimes really nicely. And so as a takeaway, I would suggest that segmenting your ad copy by age range and A/B testing different messaging is something that's certainly worth doing in the coming months if you haven't already done so. Fine. So then let's move on again. We were interested in understanding how prospects research their bets. How much time do they spend researching? You can see the results there. But to give it some context, I'm going to say something perhaps slightly controversial, which is I don't think that creating content for gaming brands is particularly difficult. There is a constant stream of sports news. Even in casino, there's plenty that we can be talking about. Receptional as a business, we produce several thousand pieces of sports and gaming related content every year. There is no shortage of content that we can be writing about, whether that's match reports or advice or previews. You know, there's lots we can be covering. The real challenge in this market is creating content that is engaging and effective at capturing and converting your site's visitors into new customers. That's the real challenge in this space. And that's why we wanted to understand how punters are researching their bets. And according to the study, as you can see, most punters don't spend a huge amount of time, less than 30 minutes researching before they put on a bet. And so we also asked them then about format and what was the best format for content. And more than 2/3 were interested in video content, in watching. Second is obviously reading, and fewer interested in kind of podcasts and listening, which takes us to some takeaways. And I think, you know, with that in mind, I would say it's worth going back, reviewing your approach to video in your blog or in your news content. Are you creating enough short form video is really the question. Secondly is checking that you're sharing and promoting your video on social media, not least because Facebook, for example, is biased towards video and animation. So make sure that you're sharing enough video on those channels. And then I think if you're thinking about advertising, which is slightly more strategic and targeting a particular audience, then I would suggest that you should be using YouTube ads as a way of prospecting and reaching that new audience because it's so cost effective. And just as a benchmark, we would say that probably about 10% of your ad spend should be spent on YouTube for prospecting with your audience. So as just when you go back to your business, just check your campaign spend and see how it compares to that particular benchmark. Cool. So we've covered a lot there of the insights. We're now thinking about the year ahead, and I don't think any forward-thinking discussion would be complete without mentioning the Gambling Act review, as I did earlier. And I think, like everyone else, we're in a similar position. We're waiting to see how that impacts the market and therefore how it impacts our positioning and tactics for the clients that we work with. I think one thing is for sure, though, is that there's going to be a lot more news coverage around this, and that really should impact the way that we think about our ad placements. And apologies if there's anybody from SpreadX in today, but I've taken a screenshot of where one of your ads appeared. And as you can see, it's right alongside this piece in the Mail Online, which is probably not the most appropriate place for it to be appearing. But you know, it's a genuine screenshot, and I think it just highlights the problem of making sure that we're placing our ads in appropriate places. And so it's worth bearing in mind that Google's ad network, as we know, is incredibly far-reaching. There's millions of potential placements that we're going to need to manage, and digital publications like the Mail Online offer enormous reach. And that's a good thing, but we just need to manage where our brand is positioned. And as I said, in the months ahead, we're expecting a lot more news coverage around the topic of the Gambling Act review and some of the dangers around gambling. And so I think there's an increased risk for each of our brands about appearing alongside this content. And so we have for you 4 pillars of brand safety for you to take back into your businesses this week. And really, we're just there checking, make sure that your brand is appearing in appropriate places. So the first tip I would say is digital content labels. Within your Google Ads interface, there is effectively like a film classification system there, where everything's rated as PG and U, and those types of classifications around the content. And what I would say is that the default there is to display everywhere. And that's probably not right for us for the brands that are in the masterclass today. So I would say make sure that your PPC team has clear guidelines and that those guidelines are being carried through as to where you want your content being distributed. You can also change your sensitive content, the second pillar, and I would say that exclude all is probably what we want to be doing. We don't want our brand to be appearing next to stories about tragedy or conflict. That's not good. And then thirdly, checking the inventory type. And I think here standard is fine. There's a standard setting. That's okay, provided the other 3 pillars are working as they should do. And then the fourth point is around negative keywords. We see in our search campaigns buckets and buckets and buckets of negative keywords in the campaigns that we review, and that's absolutely right. We want our ads to be highly targeted. We see far fewer negative keywords in our display campaigns. If we look at a potential client's account and we review it, we see far fewer negative keywords in most of the accounts that we review. And so we've created here a list, and we'll share these slides afterwards so that you will have the list to take back into your businesses of some topical negatives that you probably want to add to your campaigns now, so that you're excluding appearing next to these topics in the months ahead. And that will just kind of safeguard your brand and make sure that it appears in appropriate places. Cool. And then 2 final suggestions from me. First of all, responsible gaming messages I think are really important, that we have those in our ads. And just some tips for doing that. First of all, responsible gaming message I think should probably appear in, if you can fit it in path 1 and path 2, which is just a setting within the AdWords interface. And as you can see, it's highlighted there on the screen. So the first pink overlay is what I'm talking about here. If you can get those messages into the top line, it has less impact upon your relevance. We want our ads always to be relevant, obviously, to the customer search and to the landing page. And so we don't want to reduce that relevance because it's expensive when it comes to advertising on search campaigns. And the second place that you might want to place your responsible gaming messages in the call out extension. And what we see in this market is that call out extensions are pretty popular. Google includes them a lot. And so it's a good way of guaranteeing that your message gets seen, and in particular by your compliance team. If they're checking your ads, then the ad will show up and you won't have to field those phone calls saying, where's your messaging? Why is it not in place? So I think that's a couple of tips there around responsible gaming messaging and making sure they're appearing appropriately within your ads. So I hope there's some useful information there, both from the survey and from their discussion about responsible gaming. I'm going to pass back to Simon in a couple of minutes. I would love to hear your thoughts upon the survey data that we've shown you, and any questions, of course, we're very, very happy to answer. Simon, back to you.
Thank you very much, Justin. I think that was some quite insightful content that you covered there today. Just to let you all know, as you have signed up for today's session, we will of course be sending out a copy of this ebook once it's ready and finalised, and of course we will include you on any sort of upcoming newsletters and things like that. Of course, if you don't wish to receive these, then just please let us know. And then just quickly before we move over to the questions, if you would like an audit of your paid media strategy, then please let us know. We can put you in touch with Matt, who heads up our PPC team, and then we can arrange a conversation on that. So I'll then move over to some of the questions, and just a reminder, if you have thought of anything else you'd like to ask us, please pop it into the box on the right hand side. But first question, Justin, if we don't have a great Trustpilot score, are there ways we can promote our customer service in our ads?
I think that's a good question. I think lots of brands that we work with, or that we've lots of brands that we've reviewed don't necessarily have good Trustpilot scores in this sector. I think it's not something that's been hugely emphasized, but we know from work that we've done in kind of retail and other areas that consumers now are they expect to see that sort of information in an ad. So, your Trustpilot review or anything like that. So if you've got good reviews, then do include them. If not, then I think there's other possibilities. So, for example, lots of brands in this sector will have responsible gaming awards. You can include those in your ads. If you've got customer service awards that are, that are separate for Trustpilot, then you can include information about that. It may be that you've got internal metrics within your business. So you measure the response times of your customer service team to incoming inquiries, and you can say, well, we respond to 96% of inquiries within 2 hours or something like that. That kind of information, I think, it is possible to put in your ads and test as something separate to the so just something separate to Trustpilot reviews and also to the kind of the standard offer stuff. Because I think just to remind ourselves of the kind of the poll that you gave us as opposed to what the panel said, I think there was a big difference there. We talk about welcome offers a lot. We talk about kind of brand reputation being important, but I think customer service isn't something that we think about quite so much. And I think if your customer service is poor, then that's a conversation for you to be having internally from an operational point of view. That's clearly something that that we should be thinking about. But from a marketing point of view, then certainly yes, we can. There's other things that we can try that don't just rely upon those kind of your 4 or 5 star Google rating or your 4 or 5 star Trustpilot review. Cool. Nice question. Thank you, Simon.
Okay. The next one is, what are the best types of video content for ad purposes?
That's probably a whole webinar in itself, isn't it? As to kind of what sort of video content we could create. I think there's 2 ways of thinking about it. There's the organic approach, which we haven't really covered today, which is about creating just interesting video content to engage an audience, which gets shared and watched and all the rest of it. I think with lots of brands in this space that we've talked to, they often create lots of video content, but it doesn't get that much coverage. And so inevitably you end up talking about paid media to support that. And I think if you've got video content, we can certainly be promoting that in a small way on YouTube to kind of build up an audience. I think that's a useful thing to be doing. And then that can be in any format. That's whatever's best suited to the content topic that you're talking about. If we're thinking more strictly about advertising, which I think is a more strategic play, because you've identified an audience and you want to get a specific message out to them, then I would say typically you're talking about a 6-second advert or a 15 to 30-second advert, depending upon the approach that you're taking. And in those cases, then you probably want something that's going to work really well within those 6 seconds, which is about getting your brand message across clearly and quickly, so that it's memorable. That's what the audience talked about, right? So I would be thinking about creating some of your own content at that point. And it needn't be the Hollywood blockbuster. It can be something really quite simple that feels like a video, but is really made up from a series of stills and text. And there's a number of interesting tools. So YouTube has a video builder tool, which will create you really some simple videos out of imagery and text. So you could have a couple of, if it was a footballing audience, you could have some, footballing shots plus offers and that kind of information in the ad that you can deliver perhaps within 6 seconds, or if not, then within 15 to 30. And you can create those almost completely from stills. You don't need to be spending big budgets just to test YouTube. And the other options are Canva, I think, has got, that's a really simple tool for just creating, basic ads. And then Adobe and Facebook have their own kind of, similar tools as well. So there's plenty of options for creating advertising content that needn't cost the earth.
Brilliant, thank you. I think the last question we've got there then is just, when does the ebook come out?
That is a good question, Simon. I haven't got a definite date actually. Client work always comes first, but within the next few weeks we'll publish that. And I think what we'll do, if it's all right with everyone, we will send you a copy of that to the email address that you used to register today, and we'll stay in touch to make sure you've kind of got the latest information. If you don't want us to do that, then of course just let us know, and we won't send you any information. But yeah, a paid and more detailed, sorry, a printed and more detailed version of the ebook will be published, and we will send copies of PDF out to that to you within the next few weeks, and that does contain a bit more detail. We're also very happy to share today's slides. We'll send those around afterwards to anyone who's interested, and we will include a recording of this session on our blog, so that if your teams want to watch it, or there's particular stuff you want to reference, then your teams can do so. Cool. Any more questions or thoughts or comments come in? I think for me, the most interesting point was just that the difference between what our marketers today thought and what our panel was saying. And I think there's plenty of room there to be experimenting and testing in the weeks ahead. Any more questions for us, Simon?
No, that's it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We shall say goodbye.
Thanks very much, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Simon.